Hey guys, I was kind of like writing a little report for people to kind of make them ponder. It's been a while since I've worked on it, so um, kind of want to just go over this little summary um, of some cool stuff I thought we would go over from just my readings of some of my favorite authors and things like that. So here you go. I'm just going to read it to you real quick, and yeah, just wanted to share. It says, why are we here? How did it happen? In many ways, humans are alien to this planet we live on. Scholars again and again have taken on the task of answering these and other questions, tracing life back from us, modern-day humans, to single-celled organisms billions of years ago. After tracing these origins, the scholars became puzzled and worried, especially when trying to calculate the odds of life elsewhere. Life simply doesn't belong here. If it was created by a chance act of spontaneous chemical reactions, why does life on Earth have a single source and not a multitude? Why is it that everything living here contains very little of the chemical elements found here and too much of the chemical elements that are very rare on our planet? Was Earth a garden of dirt where life was seeded from elsewhere? We humans, standing on top of the evolutionary chart, makes the question even more puzzling. Archaeologists finding skeletal remnants believed at one point man originated about 500,000 years ago in Asia. Over time, more and more fossils were found, and the paradigm shifted. Our ancestral apes we came to find were developed some 25 million years ago, with the transition to man-like apes about 14 million years ago. According to fossil records and carbon dating, that is, anyways, around 3 million BC, we developed enough as a species to be worthy as the prefix Homo, and about 2 million years ago in Africa, the first truly man-like apes appeared. To get to the Homo erectus stage in development, it took another million years. Add another 900,000 years until the first primitive man arrived, the Neanderthals, named after the place where they were found. And then about 35,000 years ago, another species, Cro-Magnon man. As he did, the Neanderthals disappeared into extinction. So as I just kind of worded it funny, it was Cro-Magnon man appeared, Neanderthals seemed to disappear. And I put a note, Cro-Magnon man, if dressed up and put in a crowd of people today, would fit right in. All the art left behind in the caves they lived in led us to arrive at the name cavemen when referring to them. They had the ability to move shelter to shelter and move anywhere. Caveman was a nickname, it wasn't literal. It should also be noted that the first time in 2 million years, tools existed that made man complex or specialized tools or collecting rocks and sticks with useful shapes instead of just thinking they had to, just deal with it. Society was organized. They had clothes, weapons, tools. They lived in clans. They buried their dead. Their drawings show art, depth of emotion. They were cultural. Even drawings and sculptures seem to show some form of religion among them, worshiping a mother goddess. Mother goddess equals the crescent moon symbol. Which indicates thoughts and reflections on life, death, and possibly an afterlife. Remembering these people just seem to do this all overnight, so evolutionists want us to believe, even though the evidence shows us otherwise. This is but one piece of the puzzle, because over time, we found more and more fossils and skeletal remains. It became more and more apparent that Cro-Magnon man stemmed from an earlier race of Homo sapiens who lived in the Fertile Crescent about 250,000 years ago. Before that, the appearance of modern man is about 700,000 years before Homo erectus and about 200,000 years before Neanderthals is impossible if you consider how long the natural evolutionary path of a species takes. It's also obvious that Homo sapiens are such a grand evolutionary leap from their predecessors that we actually have obtained abilities that were not yet developed by earlier primates, such as speech and written word, somehow skipping key developmental and vital crucial steps of physical and social evolution. There are many experts on this subject if anyone wants to further this research. To further add to this puzzle, the evolutionary leap happening during the last ice age on Earth and the climate, needless to say, would have been unforgiving at that time. So it becomes obvious that we have features not seen in our ancestors and yet haven't developed some of the genetic traits we should have, such as having predominantly more hair on our backs instead of our chests. Every other mammal on the planet has hair thicker on its back except its chest. Humans are the only ones that are like that. Homo sapiens have many more fossil relatives, but no progenitor, as experts would call it, or an indefinite species that had evolutionary developed from a primarily from. So basically something to stem it back to. How did modern man appear 300,000 years ago instead of 2 million years ago, or 2 million years into the future, as evolution would have had it? Were we imported or seeded here? Were we created by the gods, as so many religious texts say? We found the cradle of society in modern man, but most scientists and historians agree that through evolution, man should be without society or even the features present in our genome. There is no explainable reason why we're not still in tribal living situations like most of the primitive and exotic places in the world still do to this day. We've been told these tribesmen live like this. They are in the Stone Age because they've been isolated, correct? Okay, isolated from what? They live on the same planet. They have the same DNA at the same time. Why wouldn't they acquire the same knowledge and develop the same technologies on their own as other parts of the world did? It literally took us 2 million years to realize we didn't have to find rocks shaped like the ones we needed for a tool, but instead we could chip it, grind it, or sharpen it for our needs. Why wouldn't it take another 2 million years to use other materials and tools, another 8 million years or so to master and develop math, sciences, and arts? So people widely accept all this data, but don't look at the numbers and realize 50,000 years ago we were cavemen, and now we've been participating in space travel for the better part of 80 years or so. Cro-Magnon man has made a huge jump almost instantly from its ancestors. Overnight, they developed an ability to build shelters, a want and skill to clothe his body, manufacture tools, sculptures, drawings, and art. This is miraculous considering the knowledge at the time it would take to naturally achieve this, as we see with the numbers. Even though scientists and scholars can't explain why or how Illuminati controlled information, they have indefinitely agreed upon where and when. The Fertile Crescent, North Africa, and today's Middle Eastern modern-day Iraq. In this area, there are caves. The caves have preserved a lot of antiquities from the first generation of modern man. Shanidar is a good reference when researching these caves. In 1957, researchers found a cave that was sealed by a rockfall in searches of clues of early man. They came across a family of 7 who took shelter in a cave on a winter night and were crushed by rockfall around 44,000 years ago. As they sifted through the collected debris, they found records of habitation and civilization in the area dating back from 100,000 years ago to 13,000 years ago. The records showed a huge gradual decline in human societies and civilization over the period that the records were kept. Generation after generation of decline in people and society, each one less civilized than the last. The records show from around 27,000 BC to 11,000 BC a decimation or absence of the population. Then at about 11,000 BC, thinking man appeared, as if it was lifted from the ashes of the previous society by a hidden hand and pushed forward. At this time, we see the birth of agriculture, the growing of wheat and barley, and all other grains essential for human life. Scientists are continuously baffled by how we cultivated wheat, barley, and that in a rapid domino effect, we too grew. I basically just worded that funny. Wheat and barley, we grew rye, spelt, millet, and flax for fibers and edible oils, and a varieties of fruit-bearing shrubs and trees, apples, pears, figs, nuts, etc. In every case, especially those ones listed, the plants were grown and domesticated for at least 1,000 years in the Middle East before ever reaching Europe. It was like a genetic botanical lab, like Monsanto was producing plants that could grow and be domesticated and acclimated to earth. Again, evidence of a hidden hand grabbing man from the ashes and raising him up, dusting him off, and preparing him to be better and more ready than he was before. We know from the Bible the location of the first orchard, biblical reference, east of the land of Israel, and a land watered by 4 rivers. And the Bible references 2 of those being the Tigris and the Euphrates. So for the record, the Bible, scholars and scientists alike place cultivation of plants and fruits in the Middle East as they spread to other places in the world. So basically, the Bible said it 2,000 years before scientists found it out. It's undeniable and proven. Once you understand these facts, you can take into consideration the Bible told us hundreds of years before scientists did. Where did the first garden was? The Garden of Eden, which story actually was a forgery of one of these records. So it gives some scientific correlation that the Bible has clues and hints set aside in a storyline context. This is where the confusion came from in our last videos and why I'm further in-depth explaining this, blah, 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 blah. The Book of Genesis located the first apple orchard in eastern Mesopotamia, and for that part, the Bible and science are in full agreement. Scientists tell us the process went from wild grasses to wild cereals to cultivated cereals, followed by fruit-bearing trees and shrubs. This is exactly the process mentioned in the first chapter of the Book of Genesis. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth, and it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after its kind, and a tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind, and God said it was good. So by 7000 BC, if you notice that, it tells you in the same order that scientists did. By 7000 BC, pottery was an everyday part of society. And between that time and 4500 BC, society began to regress and become less articulate and more simple. As time went on, the pottery got less complex. Again, showing how civilization was slowing down and went backwards from some time. Stone tools were a thing of the past, started being used more and more, and things became more primitive. Clay and pottery manufacturing declined and ceased. And then out of nowhere in the Middle East, civilization was pulled from the ashes yet again from some hidden hand and created a society so great that it influences your everyday life even today. For a long time, Western scholars and historians assumed the roots of civilization started in Rome and Greece, but the Greek philosophers repeatedly noted that they were inspired by even earlier sources. When reading Egyptian texts and hieroglyphs, we see the Egyptian civilization outdated Greek and Roman societies. A closer look at artifacts and records of the islands and mainlands around Egypt and Rome reveal the Middle Eastern society was the originator of the techniques and culture that all civilizations that came after adopted. Many scientists noticed huge similarities in the Hellenic and Semitic cultures down to the Hebrew and Hellenic alphabets, and both derived from the Middle East. We are aware of the Greek contacts in the Middle East in the first millennium BC when the Persians were defeated by Alexander the Great in 331 BC. Greek records tell us a lot about the Persians and their lands, whose roots we've come to find out came out of the people of Babylon and Assyria, which society's fall is recorded in the Old Testament, who manufactured chariots, sculptures, swords, tools, and everything else in their everyday life, just about any material imaginable, taken from the mines of Assyria. This culture left us thousands and thousands of records in the cuneiform text telling us cosmological tales, long epic poems, history of and royalty of kings, temple record, contracts for works, wage prices, marriage and divorce records, astrological tables, forecasts, mathematical formulas, geography, vocabulary, grammar, school books, texts telling the genealogy, duties, and beliefs of their gods. The language used at that time was universal and called Akkadian. This too mentioned in the Old Testament. Neither civilizations claimed to have originated the language, rather too they adopted it, even citing a note like a copyright giving credit to the originals at the bottom of the text, inscriptions, and writings. This now raises the question of where did these languages come from? Who were the people that created the original? Why did the Assyrians and Babylonians call it Akkadian? We can recall from the Book of Genesis that the first civilizations mentioned were Babel, Erech, and last but not least, Akkad. The ruins left behind, the relics found in Mesopotamia, give us a conclusive evidence that at one point in history there was a great city called Akkad, who was ruled by a king himself, and his native language was called the Righteous Ruler. He claimed in his inscriptions the empire stretched by the grace of God, Enlil, from the lower sea to the upper sea. So scientists once again became confused. They came across the Mesopotamian Empire in the 3rd millennium BC, making a 2,000-year backwards leap from the Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations. The relics and artifacts found proved, indeed, Akkad was 2,000 years before Babylon and Assyria, yet it was full-fledged civilization that was fully developed. Language, writing systems that came after were indeed based off and stemming from the Akkadian language and culture. So once again, we thought we found the roots of our society, having known that this city existed, let us know that there had to be a level of high civilization before 3000 BC. The key to unlocking the mysteries of the origins of the original society lied in language. Scientists took a closer look at the Akkadian language and see that it was Slavic, meaning sometimes a letter represented a complete syllable and sometimes explaining ideas like country, city, god, etc. This is explained by these symbols being remnants of an older style writing using pictographs similar to the Egyptian hieroglyphs. Scholars found a lot of words borrowed from other texts and languages, much like languages work today in our Latin roots and medicine naming of species. These especially did did this when using scientific and technical words, also, especially when referring to the gods. The first excavation of the ancient Mesopotamia was started in 1869. It was so fruitful that archaeologists remained digging there and didn't even finish removing all the relics to be found when they quit in 1933, not finishing the job. This is when scientists first gave credit to the Sumerians and being the parents of modern civilization, calling them Sumerians and the land Sumer. The decipherment of the Sumerian script unlocked a lot of hidden and lost knowledge of history. All civilizations after followed their lead and the culture they created. We can now see that all the evidence points to this as the starting point of everything that we know today. The site of the excavation turned about to be an ancient royal city of Sumeria that started around 2900 BC and lasted over 650 years. Over that period, 43 kings reigned without interruption, and the city we came to find out was named Lagash. Genealogies and links of terms were all efficiently recorded. Gudea was one of the famous rulers, which himself had large statues of himself made showing worship to the gods. Gudea devoted himself in his reign to Nimgirshu and Inerta, and the construction of the temples and irrigation channels. When gathering building materials, he kept records of them and where they came from. He imported gold from Africa, cedar from Asia, copper from Arabia, and the list goes on and on. In the Old Testament, it says, when Moses built a residence for the Lord in the desert, he did so by very detailed instructions given to him by God. 1,200 years ago, before Moses, Gudea made the same claims. His instructions, which he had recorded in one very long inscription, give him a vision. The vision is as followed. A man that shone like heaven, by whose side stood a divine bird, commanded me to build his temple. This god was identified as Ningersu. Alongside this god was a goddess, who held a tablet, which on it her favorite star of the heavens. In her other hand, she held a holy stylus, which she told Gudea was the favored planet. A third man is also a god. In his hand, a tablet of precious stone, which contained the plan to the temple. One of Gudea's statues shows him seated with the tablet on his lap, carved out with the blueprints of the temple. When he had his vision, he was baffled, so he sought out the knowledge and wisdom from people who at the time were called goddesses, who could interpret divine messages. She explained to him the plans, measurements, and the size of the materials and bricks that should be made out of. He then employed a male diviner who could make decisions, and a female searcher of secrets to find the place where the gods wanted the temple built on the outskirts of the city where the god wanted the temple to be placed. He then employed 216,000 people to carry out the construction. His confusion can be understood when considering he was given a two-dimensional representation of a seven-stage temple with seven scales smaller than the first scale stacked on top of each other topographically. The ability to carry out complex construction according to complex plans, gather and import materials, supply, feed, and sustain a massive workforce while mastering in engineering, tool-making, importing rare metals and shaping them, even to flatten and raise dirt, shows the advancements of a culture as a whole. So we know we had a society in full bloom in around 3000 BC. The feats mentioned are but a side note to what they were capable of, I'm sure. The Sumerians should be credited with the invention of printing, clothing, textile factories, agriculture, writing, language, the rotary press, the cylinder seal, and even mathematics. The Sumerians used mathematic systems called hexadecimal, combined metric 0 to 9, and 1 through 6, sometimes showing a number system, which allowed to divide into fractions or simply into millions, and even portions into 360 degrees of a circle perfectly. Many of the math can be done with a finger counting scheme, 360 degrees circle, 12 inches in a foot. The foot itself are remnants of this number system. The list of metal used, harvested, named, and shaped at the time shows they had an extensive knowledge of metallurgy. They also had doctors that used petroleum products daily. They used two rivers on either side to build canals and irrigate crops, which also shows they used boats to ship cattle, humans, and goods. In the 50s, we deciphered their language, and when studying what is now known as the Sumerian tablets, we gained a lot of insight into their world. The table of contents of this records had 25 chapters, each dealing in one form or another with society's first schools, the direct effect of creating languages and writings, the first government, the first historian, the first pharmacy, the first doctors, the first farmer's almanac, first cosmetology, the first Job, the first Moses, the first Noah, the first library, the first laws, the first agriculture, the first search for world peace. While societies after were concerned with rules, the Sumerians were concerned with justice, even believing gods appointing kings to assure justice. They are even credited with the first song ever found. We have found in southern Sumer that we believe to be the first city when excavating the temple found virgin soil underneath. The time given by this information is 3800 BC. That is where the civilization began. Take into consideration that early man started using tools 2 million years before this. Still to this day, we do not know who the Sumerians were and how they appeared. What are, after hundreds of thousands of years, even millions of years, made us so advanced that we abruptly build society and take off from there basically overnight, which based all futureless civilizations on. Even question of why at all. Like, why did that happen? How did that happen? The Sumerians tell us confidently from numerous texts that it was given to them from the gods. The Greeks and Sumerians alike describe their gods as human in character and look, even having human emotions, even procreating like humans by having sex with other gods or humans. Always mentioned, yet hard to reach, able to travel in immense speeds, appear and disappear, sometimes harnessing nature. Each had a particular duty. Humans could suffer from the outcomes if they didn't uphold their jobs. The number of 12 is recurring in the ancient gods, never allowing any more or any less. That shows a direct correlation to the astrological charts. These ancient religions also speak of a time when only the gods walked the earth, always being 12 gods that resided in heaven that came down from earth. The Latin names of these Greek gods and the Roman adopted them gave clarity to their astrological roots. Gaia was Earth, Hermes was Mercury, Aphrodite was Venus, Ares was Mars, Cronus was Saturn, Poseidon was Neptune, Zeus was Jupiter. Even in the Vedas and in the Hindu tradition where written in Sanskrit were followed these stories and the main principles, even the 12 gods. To the people who were living in now northern Iran, they went on large migrations. Some went southeast to India, and the Hindus called them Aryans or noblemen. They brought with them the Vedas around 1500 BC. Another wave of immigrants went west to Europe and also started spreading the Greek culture to Asia Minor. Who were these people? When we look into the Bible, we see that the people living in Anatolia or Asia Minor, as some call it, we find out that the Bible called them Hittites. With the clues left behind by Egyptian and Mesopotamian texts, led scientists to search the mountains of Anatolia for the remains of civilization. They found Hittite cities, palaces, and royal treasures, temples and tombs, weapons, tools, art objects, and many more inscriptions. One of the ancient monuments found in one of these Hittite cities is a rock carving of the gods of the Hittites in the correct order, left to right, organized in groups of 12, just like the Greek Olympian 12. And their other lesser gods and demigods, all in groups of 12 too. The greater gods of the earth were related to celestial bodies, so they worshiped living and non-living, present and non-present gods, which some of these gods were originally born of the heavens and others were present among the people acting as supreme rulers. The origins of these Hittite gods can be studied in a long epic poem called Kingship in Heaven, which spoke of 12 elder gods and their descent to earth, written 1,000 years before the Greek tales. And this is the origins of these stories as the Greeks stated. It is very apparent that these texts had their roots in Sumeria. The people's names placed in all the references of these stories were Sumerian down to the gods' names. It's safe to say the Hittites worshipped the gods of Sumeria. When the Hittites reached Babylon in 1600 BC, the Sumerians were long gone. So how is it they inherited everything from them? They adopted it from the Hurrians, which were their namers of the Sumerians, where they adopted their beliefs. The Canaanites had all the similarities from the later Greek religions. The Egyptians even had all the same similarities, just interpreted slightly different as all the other branches did. They too adopted all their civilization from the Sumerians. All of them believed the same thing and drew from the same source for knowledge. Under close inspection, we can understand that the 12 gods were the celestial bodies of our solar system, and the lesser gods were beings of earth, gods of heaven and earth. The original names are as follows: the Sun, Apsu; Mercury, Mumu; Venus, Lamu; Earth, Ki; Moon, Kingu; Mars, Lamu; Jupiter, Kishar; Saturn, Anshar; Uranus, Anu; Neptune, E; Pluto, Gaga; Nibiru, Marduk. And I have a little chart here. The names only changed after that, and every religion's adopted their stories and teachings, basically. But this is basically where we know that stuff came from. That's where we know, the idea of these Tiamat being destroyed and things like that, the retrograde of the planets, the pull, the crossing of the planet, everything. So this is kind of the beginning, a little bit of brief history of how we started correlating that information, and it's getting late for me, guys. So as I promised you guys, I'll give you some more like the histories and the part twos and all that. But I got so many projects I want to share. So hope you guys enjoyed that. And yeah, let me know what you think.